Welcome to our first patch rundown of Diablo 4, and I was definitely not expect to say this sentence before the game is released, but the developers did something really nice. So they collected all the feedback from the both betas and already tried to adapt the feedback from the community and provide us with some insights on the now still ongoing development process. And in this video, we will go over all the changes that are going to be live on the 6th of June when the game is being released. And you can also expect videos like this on this channel whenever there's a patch coming out. And the more we know about the game, the more in detail we can also give you information on how a patch maybe affects different builds and all this stuff. And with every patch, we will obviously also adapt our guides on different builds. But now let's take a look at the changes that have actually come. And one of the biggest concerns were the dungeon design. So many people felt the worry that in a dungeon, they would have to do repetitive tasks. They would have to go, for example, all the way to the left side to collect something, then going back to the altar in the middle, then going all the way to the right, and constantly having to move through the same direction without facing any mobs or new advantages or items drops. So I would say overall they have come up with a decent solution here by changing the layout of the dungeons. So they are not, many of them were like a circle, now they are more linear, and their main goal was basically achieved this way. So you don't have to run through big areas where there is no more monsters that can actually give any value to you. Then dungeons should feel some kind of interesting, even if you do them multiple times. And therefore they increase the chance of events to spawn inside of a dungeon to 60%. So that means like 1 out of 2 dungeons basically you're having an event which makes the dungeon more rewarding if you're talking about drops. And of course more interesting because you never know what kind of object you're able to pick up without triggering an event. So like every chest, basically every pillar is now a gamble, and you have to decide do I pick it up or do I kill my elites first and then pick it up. So it adds a little bit more strategy right there. Then one of the dungeon issues as well was that if you had to complete 100% of a dungeon, like all the monsters in the dungeon, and you missed like one tiny mob at the start, you would have to backtrack all the way. And now they are changing this by making those monsters run towards you. So like they will keep following you and not stay still, especially when it's about the small ones. So this way they are trying to remove the backtracking. Then some dungeon designs, they are trying to make it more interesting and more interacting. So for example, one dungeon design was where you had to gather animals, which means you would have to kill elite packs, and those packs then drop the animals. And if you're now collecting it, you can reduce your cooldown, you can get resources back, which makes it a lot more attractive to collect a lot of packs on the same place and kill them this way. And also, a lot of people didn't like the fact that you constantly had to channel for a long time in dungeons. So for example, if you're putting the animals into the box, it was 3 seconds, now it's 0. So it's instantly, if you're now rescuing some of the people that were tied to poles, which was basically a quest you would have to do in the dungeon to get to the next stage, they will now do it in half of the time, and they will also drop a health potion upon completion. And yeah, many people didn't like the fact that you had to collect a lot of items, like a bloodstone, for example, and you move them all the way back to the pedestal. And now if you're actually getting a benefit if you're picking this up of 25% movement speed. And you don't have any channel time anymore. This is especially important for some dungeons where the pedestals actually stood inside of a trap, and you would also have to time your 2 seconds to be able to cast it while the trap is not active. And all those shenanigans are not needed anymore, so you'll have a much more fluent gameplay. Returning a portal object to its pedestal now fully restores health, resources, potions, and resets cooldown for all nearby players. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. All doors will now generate a mini-map ping when they are opened, okay. And all structure objectives in dungeons now have additional combat mechanics players must overcome. So we are talking here about traps and stuff that make it more difficult. Or sometimes in a dungeon you see when you're walking through that like earth is shaking and a lot of stones and wood is basically falling on you that can knock you down and basically get you killed. And those mechanics got increased even more to make the dungeons more interacting and also test the player's skill. And we've also had some changes to the different classes. And overall, we are now able to have a longer stun and freeze duration on elite monsters. They made again sure that all classes have a decent access to remove control and pairing effects, such as Unstoppable, for example, cause like if you would fight multiple elite packs at the same time, there was a high possibility that they would chain CC you and you had no counterplay to it. So the only counterplay is basically like evaluating the situation, looking at the affixes that the elite packs have and then deciding if you can take it or can't take it and don't make any mistakes. So this is a change that definitely helps the hardcore players, but on the other hand makes it less fun to play because there's less potential to die. And of course, like playing hardcore, if there's many options to die, is a lot more fun than if there's only a few ones. And on this one here, many legendary powers have had updates to their effectiveness. We can't really say too much about it because we don't know any numbers. Then the Barbarian got an early life buff. So Barbarian was struggling a bit early with his tankiness. So he now got a 10% passive damage reduction. And therefore the damage reduction in the skill tree got reduced a little, which means in the early game he is stronger. And in the late game when you're going with the skills, it's basically the same. So it's an early game buff that we're having here. And then we are having a shift of the whirlwind skill. So the whirlwind skill now deals more damage. I don't think that was actually necessary because there was already builds, whirlwind builds that were basically one-shotting everything spin to win. But they're also saying it consumes more fury. So now we have to evaluate this correctly. We would have to test if the consuming of the fury means we cannot whirlwind all the time. So if this is what they're actually going to, so you have to be a bit more specific in when you want to go into whirlwind and not perma whirlwinding, then this change could be a kick through the gameplay for sure. Then we have the double swing skill enhancement, refunds its all fury cost when used on stunned or knocked down enemies. Yeah, this is perfectly fine. Then in the druid we're having some interesting changes. Companion skills will now deal heavily increased damage. This is interesting because there was also already a one-shot druid build going around where the wolves that you can spawn transfer into werewolves and you can send them out for kill and it's a one-shot. So looking really forward how this is going to be balanced. Then ultimate skills have their cooldown reduced, perfectly fine. Usability improvements have been made to maul and pulverize. This is really important because there was a slight delay from pressing the skill to actually executing the skill when you're talking for pulverize, for example. So it looked like when he was raising his hand before he goes down, this was not in the animation yet, and now they fixed it, so allows for a really smooth gameplay as all the other classes already have. And then we are having using a non-shape-shifting skill will transform a druid back into their human form. This is pretty important because this will make a high difference in how you actually set up your builds. Because there's supposed to be unique items that will permanently allow you to be in a werewolf form or werewolf form. And we have to see if those unique items are going to be affected by this or not. And we also have to make sure that we are now building around a certain spec. So if we're building around Werebear, for example, we cannot put the no shapeshifting options in there, or we are doing it on purpose and have something to compensate for it. But there's lots of passives and stuff that you can get when you remain into a certain form for a longer period of time. So yeah, this will give a lot more build variety to the druid, I assume. Then next up we're having a necromancer. Summoned minions will die more often, which makes perfect sense. Recurring, because this allows people to be more interactive and not like AFKing around, letting the minions do all the work, and also puts more value to resource generation spells, like Decompose, to actually get your corpses up. But this would also mean that boss fights are going to be a bit more challenging. Then the bonuses in the Book of Dead that their stats reduced, not too much to say. Corpse Explosion was extremely powerful, especially with the invincible strategy with Blood Mist. So I'm pretty sure by reducing this, they've also taken care of the Blood Mist situation, so we don't have no invincible builds on release. And then there's probably something a lot of people are happy about, that the brightness of the skeletons was been reduced, because so many people were mad that the alpha skeletons looked so much better than the beta skeletons, because the beta looked like cartoon figures, and now if the brightness is gone and the health bar might looks a bit more fitting to the actual monster, then yeah, I think Necromancer looks really nice from a graphical standpoint. Then the Rook, Subverge skills bonus increased, multiple passive skills bonus increased, okay. And the Ungrumen skills have their cooldowns increased, which is really nice, because I think it was a bit too easy to pull off those combos, and I think from the classes that we've seen, Rogue has the highest skill gap, and I think it's nice to have a class in the game that requires a higher skill gap to be played at a perfection, but is still accessible at lower levels as well. And I think the Rogue currently fulfills this option as a class choice perfectly. Then next up, the Sorcerer. The charge forge damage was increased and the mana was decreased. This is probably to make up for the decrease of the damage in Chain Lightning, and they also gave it a nerf, so it's not as effective versus bosses, where you could basically have a legendary that gives 2 additional bounces. You go there and it bounces 7 times between you and the boss. If they are bouncing off you, that means it gets a 25% increased damage bonus, so it was pretty overpowered, and so yeah, that's pretty good. Decrease the cooldown for the Incinerate skills enchantment bonus, not too much to worry. Firewalls will now spawn underneath enemies more frequently when using its enchantment bonus. This is interesting, because if you were playing a flame-only Hydra, you could go for a Fireball in the enchantment slot, and at level 30, Firewall as a secondary enchantment slot was probably one of the best choices for the AoE clear of the threat mobs, and now it even got a little better. And then, yeah, we've talked about it before on stream, that the increase of the Meteor skill enchantment bonus is much needed. It was like 3%, and it almost never occurred, and was so bad that, like, I don't know, I think we tested it like 10 minutes, and then we instantly got rid of it and tried something else. Yeah. So we have to see how high it is, but it should definitely go a lot higher too. And maybe the Meteor also needs a bit of a radius increase to have a better impact and being a in-slottable skill for you. Then, yeah, some UI stuff, not too interesting. What's interesting is, that there was an issue where you could, for example, not put forced attack in the middle mouse button, which is something many players really like, because it's easy accessible. And if you don't know now what I'm talking about, what forced attack is, leave a comment down below the video and tell me like what's your question about it, and I can make a guide for you on how to use it in what situations it can, for example, save your ass, and when you should actually be using it and how to set it up properly and have the correct settings for using it. Then chat on the left side, yeah, many people didn't like the chat positioning because almost all games have it in the left side. And this is one that I hated so much when we were playing the beta. Whenever you were trying to access your stats to see if what you're doing during your fight, like what stats you have, what can you increase by certain passives, like how does this affect your damage, you always had to take a look at your crafting materials first, and you'd have to switch over, which is a total unnecessary stat. And we even had stats that were shown in the inventory, also shown in the stat overview, so I hope they fix this as well. This is also pretty nice. This is similar to force attack, or I can explain this in a different video if you guys want to together. And surprisingly, people, I didn't even know that was a thing, but people hated the font that was used in the game. And there was a ton of Reddit threads on like which font is better, how can they could have choose this font, and yeah, well, they actually changed the font. Not sure who's going to be happy about this. Never hear people complain about a font in a game, but here we go. And if it makes them happy, why not? Then, like, here's something I am really happy about that they did this. Not that they fixed something in the butcher. I am talking about this. Has been re-evaluated for difficulty and will present a greater challenge in World Tiers 3 and 4. So they made it even more difficult, which I personally love, because this gives a whole new challenge in hardcore. Like, if you're maybe getting faced undergeared by the butcher, how you're interacting, how you're avoiding your death, like, sounds amazing. So I hope it's really, really hard. Like, I'd rather have stuff like this being so hard that people fuck up a lot, and then being at nerf, than like being only a really mediocre challenge instead of like a real one. Then a lot of the bosses in the dungeons have been re-evaluated, because there was an issue that when you're talking about effective DPS uptime on bosses, range characters had a decently higher damage uptime than melee characters, because melee characters had to dodge a lot more abilities. So they were a lot on the movement. And if they have adjusted now the fight mechanics of the bosses a little to encounter this and giving safe zones for melees to be positioned in to deal and to have a decent DPS uptime, this sounds really good. Now, we have also had a lot of complaints about the sellers. They felt really boring. You go in there, you have one monster pack, and that's it, right? And yeah, what's the real use of them? It doesn't even contribute to renown to collect them, so why should you be doing that? And now they have increased the chance of dungeon events to incur in sellers. If I assume they have increased it on the top rate from 10% to 60%, so I assume it's the same here. And now whenever you clear a cellar, you will always get rewarded a chest upon completion, which means the value of the cellars gets bigger. And then it's just some minor fixes. But this change could mean if we're able to figure out some respawn points, right, that we might have some speed farming for this. So you basically load your game, you run into a cellar, you complete it, you log out of the game, you reopen your game, run to a cellar, and get your rewards this way. If this is an option how to get a lot of loot without getting a lot of EXP, then this might be a good option to do it during your leveling process when you feel like the leveling of the monsters is outscaling you. If this now sounded weird, that you actually want to find ways to earn less experience, then make sure to watch the level guide that I'm going to make on how to perfectly level with the adapt scaling on the level system. Because like always trying to go for what gives you the most experience per hour is not what you're actually driving for, especially not as a hardcore player. Now, yeah, so this was a bug which basically allowed you to get unlimited attack speed. Of course, they have been fixing it. And this is really nice. So there was, like, I thought they didn't add a grace period, but actually there was just a bug that was preventing you from getting your grace when you, for example, load into a new arena, a new area, when you load into a new dungeon and stuff like this. And now, like, the loading time between different parts that you're trying to interact with cannot get you killed, or at least the chance is high, is a lot lower. So yeah, because what would suck more than dying in hardcore just because you were loading really slowly into a dungeon and then getting killed by a monster without having any chance to react to it. And now, something that I am not sure why it actually in the general quality of life tab, the reset dungeon button has been disabled. So I would say this is a minus on the quality of life, but the reason why they did it is understandable. So there wasn't a way where you could use the reset dungeon button to use it as an instant escape out of dungeons from, and this for hardcore, of course, gives like some ridiculous safety and doesn't serve the purpose for hardcore. And, the way the dungeons are designed, so we're having more than 100 dungeons, means the dungeons should be farmed along the progress, along your leveling journey, and you complete them to get the codex that is located in a dungeon. So this is basically the idea behind the dungeons. The dungeons are not designed to be repeated endlessly, at least not at this stage. Later on in the end game, of course, you will repeat those dungeons, but you will repeat those dungeons not by going in there and resetting the dungeons. You will repeat the dungeons by farming nightmare sigils that give additional bonuses to the dungeon and also more difficulty and challenges. And then you can basically experience the new dungeons, and those dungeons can be repeated every time you want to. And now let's finish the video with something I would really like you to join as well. This is the live stream on April 20th featuring another YouTuber called Riker, and we are going to watch it live on stream on this channel. So if you haven't subscribed yet, it would be more than pleasant if you go and leave a subscription here, and so you turn on the bell so you get notified as soon as we are going live. Cheers, guys.